Criterion C is about how you present your thinking. Let's look at how it's assessed and how this changes from MYP 1 all the way to MYP 5. Then I'll share some tips about how best to prepare. Communication covers several key areas. Firstly, your use of mathematical language. This could be the words you use, such as factor or exponential, coefficient or denominator. But it could also be notation, so in algebra, writing n instead of 1n, or writing 2a instead of a times 2. Dividing or writing a fraction as 8 over 15 instead of 8/15. Or using units like currency symbols, or centimetres squared for area, or kilogram for weights. So all of these could be vocabulary, notation, and generally just language. The next two strands are connected with showing information clearly. There are different forms of representation that are appropriate for different kinds of mathematics. So maybe when working with negative numbers, you might use a number line. You might draw factor trees and a Venn diagram to find the lowest common multiple. Graphs or equations to show relationships. Bar models or area models for working out. Line charts or pie graphs for statistics. And you might summarize values in tables. From MYP 2, you need to be able to move between different forms. So maybe you'll have the information in a table and you'll need to be able to draw that onto a graph. Or maybe you're given a worded scenario that you could represent as a diagram and then highlight the relationship as an algebraic expression. These strands also look at how these representations are constructed. So tables should have well-defined columns and rows with headings. Axes should be labelled and have a consistent scale. Graphs might need keys, and diagrams might need figure labels to make it clear what they are showing. The fourth strand talks about clear reasoning. Showing your working is useful in your everyday, even in the classroom, so that you've got clear notes to look back on. But it's also crucial in an assessment and in any scenario where you're communicating to someone else, so that your process can be understood. However, it also depends on what command terms are used. If you're asked to state or write down, you can usually just write the answer. But if you're asked to calculate or find, calculations or other processes should be seen. Be really careful about how you set these calculations up. Working down the page is better than going across. And make sure your equal sign is used correctly. Something we often see, which is wrong, is something like the following. 18 plus 3 is 21. If you divide that by 7, you get 3. And if I square that, I get 9. This is incorrect because essentially it's saying that 18 plus 3 is equal to 9, which is definitely not true. So instead, we might want to see 18 plus 3 is 21. 21 divided by 7 is 3. And 3 squared is 9. So working down the page, not across. Clear reasoning may also link to worded reasoning, especially if the command terms are describe, discuss, explain, or justify. Let's say you were given 10, 20, 40, and you were asked to state a prediction. You could just say 80. But if you were asked to explain your reason, you might say, looking at the first 3 terms, I can see that each term is double the previous term. 20 divided by 10 is 2, and 40 divided by 20 is 2. I will therefore double 40 to predict my next term, and 40 times 2 is 80. This is a clear reason. This strand progresses as in MYP 1, the reasoning just needs to be coherent, so someone needs to be able to follow what you're talking about. In MYP 2 and above, it needs to be complete, so enough steps have to be seen to get the full picture of your process. And in MYP 4, which might seem contradictory, it needs to be concise, but still complete. So we want you to show the full process, but you need to avoid repeating yourself. Stick to the main points and change the amount of information shared or steps shared based on your audience. This is particularly relevant in real-life problems to make sure you're only discussing factors relevant to the scenario rather than talking about everything that's been presented to you. And the final strand talks about organisation. You need to organise your work so that it's easy to follow. In an investigation, this would be relevant for the part where you need to set up your own exploration. Someone looking at your work shouldn't get lost trying to find your rule or get confused about whether they're looking at your initial investigation or the final justification. Work in a reasonable order, again working down the page. Maybe including subheadings might help. Numbering your pages if you've had to ask for extra paper. In a real life problem, you may need to give a solution and reflect on it. So maybe you'd say, the solution is X. I know this because of Y, but other things to consider include Z. Not a chatty, but I did this and then I saw this, but then I thought about this and it had this answer. Then I realised in the text it said this. So really make sure you've got a clear structure. Maybe take a few minutes to have a plan before you start writing. Definitely in the long-term reports, have a clear introduction, main body with calculations, and a clear conclusion. Then bibliography and appendices if relevant. Again, subheadings, page numbers, and clear paragraph starters are really helpful. So generally, these strands stay the same from MYP 1 up until MYP 5, apart from the difference we discussed in strand 4. The difference between a lower level and a higher level in this criteria is just about consistency in these areas. Do you showcase fluency in these strands a limited amount, sometimes, usually, or always throughout the task? Therefore, a good tip is to stay aware of the amount of time you have to complete the task so that you're not rushing and dropping the quality of your communication near the end. Some further tips. Keep a mathematical glossary for each unit. Keeping the key words of the unit at the front of your mind or in the back of your book, and of course, knowing what they mean can be really helpful. This will allow you to use them, but also help you in the other criteria by making it easier to identify which strategy to use for a given question when you recognise these keywords. For representation, there may be various suitable forms in each scenario, but likely the best ones will have been introduced in the unit. So when you're reviewing your work, also look over what diagrams or graphs were used and make sure you understand how they can be used as well as the key components. Generally, investigations might require tables. Number and geometry units might have more diagrams involved. Algebraic units might have graphs and equations. Statistic units often have data tables and lots of different forms of representation. And probability units, again, have very specific diagrams like sample space diagrams, tree diagrams, Venn diagrams, etc. But do look specifically at your unit to see what's most important to review. Tip 3 actually came up in the Criterion A video as well, which is just to explain what you've learned. Explaining and being open to follow-up questions will help you to improve the clarity of your lines of reasoning. Also look for opportunities to explain to different audiences, because your friends who have recently learned the same concept as you might need a shorter explanation than adults who likely learned it a long time ago and might need a refresher. Or someone younger than you who might not have the complete background information needed would need a lot more context and maybe visual support to fully understand. This will help you consider what is coherent, complete and concise for a variety of audiences. For the last tip, you probably are more used to writing in your other subjects, so learn from those. Don't feel like mathematical writing has to be completely different. How would you normally present a report? How do you normally set up a persuasive paragraph? What is a typical structure for a discussion? Also, when you see the work of your classmates or give peer feedback, think about what makes it easy or difficult to follow. What was really helpful with moving you along, and what confused you and you maybe had to read over again? Make note of these, as these are likely the same things that would support someone else in understanding your communication. So that is it. Be sure to check out the other videos about criteria A, B, and D to get to know what else you can expect in MYP Maths.